Thanks for joining me for this webinar, for this accommodation-focused webinar today. I want to introduce you to some of our top high-end accommodation recommendations in both well-traveled cities like Tokyo and Kyoto, and then in more remote areas of Japan as well. As I'm sure you're aware, finding luxury accommodation can often be a barrier to sending clients to some of these more off the beaten path destinations in Japan. So I'm hoping that this presentation will give you some of the tools to encourage your clients to venture to less traveled parts of the country while still feeling comfortable that the accommodation there will be up to their standards. So let's get right into it and start with the city with the most high-end accommodation options, which is Tokyo. Now, in Tokyo, the challenge isn't so much finding luxury options as it is narrowing them down. So today, I just wanted to share with you some of the Art of Travel's top hotel picks in both the 5-star and 4-star ranges. And obviously, everyone has different criteria for what makes a good accommodation. So this is by no means a definitive list. But I did want to say, just tell you a little bit about how we go about evaluating the properties because it's not random. We've actually come up with our own scoring system that considers all of the points that you can see here. And so this is really what our top recommendations would be in the 5-star range. As you can see, most of the luxury hotels in Tokyo do tend to be in the east of the city. And here I've highlighted 4 of our top 5-star picks. We like these each for different reasons, starting with the Aman. That is probably the property with, in our opinion, the nicest rooms, really amazing views, easy access to Tokyo Station. But on the flip side, we do get some feedback from guests sometimes that the service can be a little bit hit and miss, and also that the public areas can feel a little bit cold and perhaps not as impressive as some of the other properties. But for the rooms, it really is one of the best places in Tokyo. And then meanwhile, the Mandarin Oriental, that probably has the nicest public area and facilities. It has really good restaurants, some Michelin-starred restaurants in there, and then also fantastic views. Unfortunately, the location is probably not as good. It's a little bit further out from the main sightseeing areas. It's in a quieter area. And then it's also important to note that although it has a really nice spa, they do not have a swimming pool, which is something that is a bit of a turnoff for certain guests. Now, Palace Hotel, this is actually the only Japanese-owned hotel on this 5-star list, and therefore, I think it definitely has the most Japanese feel. Interestingly, our team gave it the highest score of all of the hotels in this category. They really like the fact that the rooms have these large balconies with unobstructed views of the Imperial Palace, and then the hotel concierge, little known fact, is actually one of the most connected hotel concierge in the city when it comes to getting high-end restaurant reservations. So if you have clients who are foodies and really interested in getting those hard to book restaurants, then using the Palace concierge might be their best bet. And then last but certainly not least, we have the Park Hyatt, made famous by the movie Lost in Translation. This is the only hotel on the west side of the city. So if clients are interested in staying in that area, it can be a good option, although it isn't particularly easy to access from public transport since it's not really near a subway station. So that's just something to bear in mind. Of course, the public areas, the bar, the restaurants are really nice, beautiful views of Tokyo, but the rooms can feel a little bit dated in some ways, although some of our guests say that they really like that it gives the hotel a certain kind of old school charm. So I think it really is one of those properties that people kind of either love or hate. So you just have to find the right client. Now, I also wanted to give 2 honorable mentions to these 2 properties, the Peninsula and Hoshinoya Tokyo, for very different reasons. Peninsula, because we like to recommend it for families that travel with younger children. They have a Pokemon treasure hunt in the hotel, and then they really also go out of their way to make kids feel welcome there, which is not always the case for some of these 5-star properties. And then I wanted to mention Hoshinoya because we do get asked about this property quite a lot. It's definitely a very nice hotel, more ryokan style. But I will say that if clients have a chance to experience a ryokan somewhere else in Japan on their trip, they probably don't need to also stay there. The location is not amazing, to be honest. And then the hotel itself, it's really, really quiet, which is nice for some people, but not necessarily what you want if you're trying to soak in the more kind of bustling Tokyo atmosphere. Now, moving on to our 4-star selection. Again, you can see that these are mostly in East Tokyo, with the exception of Hotel Gajoen. So in the interest of time, I won't go into these into too much detail. I just wanted to show you kind of our top picks. And I did want to draw your attention to 2 of these in particular. The first is Hotel Gajoen, because it is in a really interesting and trendy, kind of different part of Tokyo to the other hotels. And it has amazing views of cherry blossoms along the Meguro River in the spring. And then we personally really like it because we think it has some of the largest suite rooms in the city for very reasonable prices. So it is worth keeping in mind as a good Japanese-owned option. And then Capital Tokyo in the bottom right, I was actually really surprised that this ranked the highest across categories. It was ranked that way by our team. So although I think it doesn't have, in my opinion, any super outstanding features, I think it's just a really good all-around solid 4-star option. So that is our selection. Obviously, you know, which hotels you select, that's also going to depend on your relationship with the hotels, the amenities you get there, the preferred rates you might get. So we understand that these might not be the ones for you. And as a reminder, we have no problem with you booking your own hotels if we're arranging a trip for you. So that's just something to remember as well. If I've missed any of your Tokyo favorite hotels, feel free to let me know in the chat, because I'm always so interested to hear which properties you're enjoying and booking as well. But for now, moving on to Kyoto. So on top of the considerations we mentioned for ranking hotels in Tokyo, here are some of the things to think about specifically for Kyoto. First of all, the location is really important, maybe more so than in Tokyo, just because the city is not so easy to get around by public transport or even by private car as Tokyo. So it is nice to be within walking distance of the main sites. And then, of course, you do tend to go to Kyoto for a more traditional cultural experience. So it is nice to stay at a property that reflects that. And then just as a more general point, I wanted to mention that prices can become really, really crazy for the top properties during peak seasons like cherry blossom. So that's why I'm also going to suggest some nice, more reasonably priced alternatives for those seasons as well. So again, starting with the 5-star hotels, these are all located in the east of Kyoto, with the new Aman property located a little bit outside of the city in the northeast there. 2 of these actually opened just in 2019. So the collection of 5-star hotels is really growing in Kyoto. Basically, the Ritz Carlton was the first 5-star hotel to open in Kyoto. So it still is really seen as the classic choice in the city. It has great views of the river during cherry blossom, but I did want to caution you to be careful that not all of the rooms have good views. Some of them are overlooking a cemetery, for example. So just be aware of which views you're booking. The river views are considered the best rooms, of course. And then the Four Seasons, which opened 2 years after the Ritz Carlton, that's also a really solid 5-star option. In a lot of ways, it's pretty equivalent to Ritz in terms of the quality of the rooms and the level of service. They're in different locations, but kind of equivalent convenience. But then Four Seasons is located in a really nice garden as well. But I do think that the new Park Hyatt Kyoto that opened at the end of 2019 does give both the Ritz and the Four Seasons a run for their money, as it definitely has the best location in Kyoto, right in the heart of Higashiyama. So at this point, it is going to be our top recommendation for clients who want to be able to just walk right out of their hotel into some of the best sightseeing in Kyoto. And then finally, I do class Amman in kind of a different category than the other three, since it is kind of attended as more of a retreat, a little bit outside of the city. It is still within walking distance of the Golden Pavilion, so there is still things to do around there. And it's also probably one of the nicest hotels in terms of facilities. So it just depends if clients prefer to stay close to the action or they want more of this retreat feel. So here on this map, I've kind of combined 4-star and boutique options just because there are not so many traditional 4-star properties in Kyoto, but there are a lot of fantastic boutique choices. One thing to notice from the map is that Hoshinoya, although it's a great property, it is quite far out in Arashiyama, and it can actually only be accessed by boats. So again, similar to Amman, this is going to be a good property for clients who want more of that retreat feeling. But we did hear from clients in the past that the fact that you have to get a boat to and from the whole time, it can get a little annoying when you're going to Kyoto all day, every day. So just something to be aware of. And then aside from Hoshinoya, we have Hyatt Regency, which is a bit dated now, but it is still a solid 4-star option. We have an Ace Hotel that just recently opened. So that's a trendy chain. They have obviously branches in the US and they opened a branch in Kyoto this year. I think the rooms are a little bit more basic, but they make up for that with some really nice community spaces. And then finally, my personal favorite, Sowaka, which is just a beautiful blend of kind of traditional Japanese touches with a more modern, comfortable feel. And it's also in a really good central location. Now, there are so many great boutique properties in Kyoto. So, if the 4 that I just mentioned don't have availability, don't worry. I've listed some other ones of our favorites here. They're all great options. And then, of course, clients can also opt to stay at a ryokan. The 2 mentioned here are really, really high end. But again, we personally recommend staying in ryokans in more rural areas, depending on the client's itinerary, just because the city ones, they tend not to have natural hot springs. And so it's still wonderful hospitality, but it's a little bit of a different experience. And then, of course, I also wanted to mention that staying in a high-end machiya, which is one of these older houses, is also a really great option in Kyoto, particularly for clients who are a little bit more independent, so they're comfortable not getting all of the services that you would get in a hotel, and they're comfortable perhaps finding their own food as well. Now, speaking of ryokan, I couldn't speak about luxury accommodation without mentioning these Japanese traditional inns. And so I just wanted to give you a little bit of insight into how we think about ryokans, because I think it is important to bear in mind the things that I've listed here. First of all, we don't recommend staying more than 2 nights in a ryokan. And that's just because they kind of have a rigid structure, which can get a little bit much after 2 nights. That's especially true for meals, since most ryokans do require that you have dinner and breakfast there every day. And these are often going to be very elaborate kaiseki multi-course affairs, especially the dinners. So more than 2 days of eating like that, I can tell you from experience, it gets a little much. It's a lot of very fancy, big meals. So I think that more than 2 days, it's enough. And then from there, it's also always important to check if the ryokan have Western style beds or just futons, since most travelers do need actual and feel more comfortable in actual beds. And then also making sure that the rooms are non-smoking, since a lot of these ryokan do still allow smoking. Accommodating dietary requirements is another important one. Not all of them can do that. And then finally, ideally, just checking if they have private open air hot spring baths, since I do think that Those are rarer than you think in ryokans, but it is an experience that most travelers look for when they're thinking about having a traditional stay. Now, most people who want a ryokan experience will go to Hakone, which is about a 2-hour drive from Tokyo. It slots really well in an itinerary between Tokyo and Kyoto. And so here you can see some of the popular options for ryokan in Hakone, my personal favorite being Gorabyakudan. But I have to say, and if you've spoken to me about Hakone, you'll already know this. Very honestly, after visiting a lot of ryokan and a lot of different places, I really want to encourage people to branch out to other ryokan and onsen destinations beyond Hakone. Just because Hakone is great, but it's become very touristy, it's very expensive. There isn't so much to do there that justifies paying that additional cost. The ryokan there are really great, but I just think that there are so many other interesting destinations where you might get better value for money as well. So that's why I did want to mention a few alternatives, all in kind of different styles. Of course, there's so many other options, but I just thought this would give you a small taste of what else is out there. So the first one is probably going to be our top pick at the Art of Travel for ryokans throughout Japan. It's located in Kaga Onsen, which is just about 1 hour drive from Kanazawa. And so we like to recommend this ryokan because the access is very convenient, kind of on the way between Kanazawa and Kyoto. And then the family that owns it, they're so friendly and hospitable. So you're really getting that traditional Japanese hospitality. It's located in a very quaint onsen area, as you can see from the photos, and it also has fantastic open air baths and very good organic kaiseki cuisine. Now, in a totally different style, if guests want a really super authentic, old school ryokan experience, then Amanokan in Shimane is going to be an unforgettable place to stay. It is all futon beds, so it isn't going to be for everyone, but it's in this really beautiful old traditional buildings. It actually has 2 buildings. And so the one you can see in the top left here is actually the annex that you can completely privatize. So you're going to have that whole house to yourself. The owner used to be a chef at a top restaurant in Tokyo before taking over the ryokan from his father. So the food there is really, really excellent. Some of the best food I've personally had in any ryokan around Japan. And the best part is that it is located in Shimane Prefecture, which you may not be familiar with, but it's currently my new top Japan recommendation, just because I think it's such a wonderful prefecture for experiencing the more traditional side of Japan. There are a lot of beautifully preserved old towns in this prefecture and a lot of traditional culture, like the Kagura Theater that you can see pictured here. And then finally, my last recommendation is, it's kind of cheating because it is technically more of a collection of villas than a ryokan. I don't think that we can call this a ryokan, but I wanted to mention something that's a little out there that still allows guests to have a hot spring experience. So Tenku no Mori is located in Kagoshima on the southern tip of Japan's Kyushu Island, so all the way to the south. This region is a very volcanic region, which is why they have excellent hot springs. And then it's also just really stunning nature there. From this region, you can easily travel to the popular island of Yakushima, which is pictured in the bottom right here, which is a great destination for nature lovers and people who want more of a hiking experience. And then when it comes to the property itself, I think that the photos really speak for themselves. It's all these kind of open concept villas in the middle of the forest. So if you're interested, I really recommend checking out their website because it's really excellent and it gives a great idea of what to expect here. Now, moving on to the last part of this webinar, which I'm really excited to talk to you about because I wanted to just talk about accommodation that's a little unique and different, which is the comincas stays. I'm personally hoping that this type of accommodation experience does become more popular once travel to Japan can resume, since I think it's going to meet people's desire to venture outside of cities and also people's desire to perhaps have more meaningful and socially beneficial travel experiences in the future. And so to introduce the idea of comincas days, I thought I would talk to you about the Setoichi Comincas Day project. Now, you may know Setoichi as the region of the art island of Naoshima, so you can probably tell that they're pretty innovative when it comes to creating new travel destinations and experiences. And this project is really no exception. Basically, their aim is to repurpose all of these old abandoned traditional Japanese homes in rural parts of the Setoichi region and repurpose them into high-end accommodations. And so here you can really see the social mission behind this project. The idea is really to address the problem of vacant houses that is caused by Japan's decreasing population, while also supporting local communities, preserving some of the traditions around these houses, and then creating authentic experiences for travelers as well. And so the concept when renovating these houses is really to preserve the existing architecture whilst also adding some modern touches to make them comfortable and fit for purpose. And then also, of course, an important part is just bringing the people who stay there into the local communities and giving them a truly local and authentic experience. So this project is really ongoing. It's pretty ambitious in scope in terms of how many cominca they're aiming to renovate. But today you can stay at a cominca as part of this project in 2 prefectures of Japan, Ehime and Hiroshima, that you can see colored in orange here on the map. And more specifically, you can stay in the towns of Shobara in Hiroshima, where there are 3 cominca properties, and in the town of Uchiko in Ehime, where there are 2 cominca properties. So just to give you an introduction into both destinations and also the cominca there, starting with Uchiko. So Uchiko is an old merchant town that used to produce wax. So it was a pretty prosperous town back in the day, and it still has a wonderfully preserved historical district with about 90 merchant homes dating back to the 18th century. And the good thing about Uchiko is that it's fairly straightforward to access by first traveling to the larger city of Matsuyama. There's direct flights from Tokyo to Matsuyama, and then it's also accessible by ferry from Hiroshima. And from there, you can take a private car or train to Uchiko in under an hour. Now, as you know, I always like to show you how these more remote destinations can fit into a whole Japan itinerary. So here I just thought I would show you what we would typically recommend for a 2-week trip, including Uchiko. I think it combines really well with a visit to the art island of Naoshima, just because Naoshima, it can be a little hectic, it gets pretty busy there, and then you can kind of head to Uchiko to have a slower pace of life and just enjoy the kind of cultural aspects of the city, or town, I should say. But let's talk about the actual cominca themselves. So there are 2 cominca in Uchiko. They're very different from each other. One is the former residence of a wax merchant, which is kind of more in a storehouse architectural style. And then the other is a former miso factory that also used to be the residence of a wood merchant, and it's more in a machiya architectural style. So just to focus on one of these properties in a little more detail, Ori, which is the former miso factory, that's located really in the heart of the historical district. And so you can see here the map of the property, it's 2 stories, and I've listed all of the specs. So you have 3 bedrooms, 2 full bathrooms, 2 toilets, and then of course a large living and dining area. If you're like me, specs only take you so far. It's nice to actually see photos of the property So here I'm just showing you a little bit of an extract. You can see there's a really nice bath there connected to a private garden. And then I also personally really like the sunken dining table just because it keeps that traditional look, but it actually makes it easier and more convenient to sit down for inflexible people like me. So hopefully you're seeing how beautiful these properties are, but you may still be wondering what there actually is to do in Uchiko. So we did make you a convenient 2-night itinerary just to show you what guests could do in this area. I would say that the main draw here is definitely experiencing the traditional culture of the area. So if you're accessing it via Matsuyama, you can first stop in Matsuyama Castle. And then in Uchiko itself, some of the highlights are going to include learning how to make washi paper at a traditional paper factory, and then visiting the Uchiko's famous Kabuki theater is also going to be a highlight. And then of course, there's also some very interesting nature in the area as well. So that's kind of nice to do once you've done some of the more cultural sites. So I don't have time to go into this into too much detail today, but please feel free to refer back to this itinerary. As Maggie said, we're going to be sending around the PDF of the presentation, so you'll have all of this information. Now, jumping back from Ehime on Shikoku Island back to Japan's main island to talk about Shobara in Hiroshima. Now, Shobara is really conveniently located between a number of popular tourist spots. So I really see Shobara as somewhere that can be a nice stop off to experience the true rural Japan within a small farming community, as you're going from kind of one tourist spot to another. And so as you can see, it's pretty accessible from a lot of major cities. You can get there from Hiroshima, but also from Okayama. And then, I talked about how much I love Shimane. Well, it's very accessible from Shimane as well. For more adventurous travelers, it can be nice to rent a car to enjoy driving through the countryside. If clients are interested in doing that way, we can, of course, support them in how to rent a car in Japan. But of course, there's also private vehicles available for people who are not feeling up to the rental process. And so this is typically what we would recommend for a 2-week itinerary. I think that sending people to Shobara is a great chance to include both Hiroshima and then Izumo in Shimane Prefecture in the itinerary, with a stop in Shobara in between. And as I said, Shimane is my new favorite place in Japan, so I definitely recommend this itinerary because I think it combines really well with a rural retreat in Shobara. Now, the 3 cominca in Shobara are all really interesting, really old farmhouses, each quite different from the other. The youngest, if I may call it that, is 100 years old, while the oldest is 250 years old. And all of them have really unique features. So just to introduce the oldest 250-year-old property briefly, this is a place filled with history to the point that it has its own museum wing in the house, but then it also still has all of the modern comforts, including a newly installed kitchen and bath. And as you can see from the pictures here, I personally love how the whole living area opens to the outside. And then, of course, I think that the bathtub in the bottom left picture is really wonderful as well. Again, you may be wondering what there is to do in the area. So we've tried to give you a good 2-night itinerary. If you think like Uchiko is really great for experiencing more traditional culture, then Shobara is going to be really great for experiencing the area's nature. That's really going to be the main draw of this area. And then the activities and sites are really going to depend on the season, because each season is going to have a really distinct personality in this area. Of course, wonderful cherry blossoms during the spring, but beautiful scenery any time of year. And so one of the highlights of staying in Shobara, I think, is definitely the dinner that is prepared at the cominca by a professional chef, as well as the opportunity for guests to do their own vegetable picking and cooking as well. And finally, after kind of 2 busier days, on the last day, we do recommend just taking it slow and enjoying the property, because a big part of staying somewhere like this is going to be to kind of just soak in the slower pace of life and feel part of the local community. So one thing that really stood out to our team when they visited this property is just how friendly and welcoming everyone in the community is, how excited they are to welcome travelers here. So that's just something, it's nice to take the time to appreciate that side of it as well. So that's it from me. We've gone from talking about big 5-star properties in Tokyo to small 250-year-old farmhouses in the middle of the Japanese countryside. So I hope I've provided some inspiration, no matter your type of client. Obviously, I know when we speak about these smaller cominca properties, it's of course not as easy to include into an itinerary, but I'm really hoping that when travel comes back, people are going to want more of this kind of experience. And I think it's really worth sending people there also because it's just so important to the local communities here in Japan. So I'll stop talking now. Let me know if you have any questions. And as always, I've left my contact details here as well if you want to talk about any of this in more detail later.